Bill Wyman has finally broken his long-held silence. In a recent interview, he confirmed what many fans had quietly suspected for years about his relationship with Keith Richards. On stage, the two were vital links in one of the most legendary rock chains in history. But away from the bright lights, things were starkly different. Bill was often excluded from decision-making, subtly looked down upon, and left to play his part without a real voice. Eventually, he chose to walk away without making a public fuss. Now, decades later, he has spoken a single, direct sentence that reveals the truth hiding behind the glamour. In October 2024, Bill Wyman attended the launch event for a special reissue of his memoir, Stone Alone. When asked about Keith Richards, he didn't sidestep the question or sugarcoat his feelings. His reply was short but crystal clear. "We never truly got along. I have no resentment, but I can't keep pretending. We're from different worlds." One night, when Brian Jones and Keith sat at a bar together, simply ignoring him, that small detail symbolized a larger truth. It was the first time in over 30 years that Wyman openly admitted the real reason behind his departure from the Rolling Stones. It wasn't about his age, nor was it about chasing a solo career. He left because he could no longer tolerate Keith Richards' treatment, quietly dismissive, persistent in its distance, and diminishing his presence in the band. Bill explained that he had already told the group almost 2 years before leaving that he no longer wanted to continue. Speaking to Classic Rock, he elaborated, "We still exchange Christmas gifts, but I've never really wanted to see Keith again. He's just not the kind of person I can spend long stretches of time with." Coming from someone who had shared the stage with Keith for 30 years, this was no throwaway remark. It reflected decades of frustration being sidelined in the studio, omitted from credits on important songs, and stripped of any real influence in the very band he had helped build from its earliest days, even back in the original 1990 edition of Stone Alone. Wyman had challenged Keith's version of the band's history. He portrayed the early Rolling Stones as a democratic unit under Brian Jones' leadership, an account that directly contradicted Keith's 2010 memoir Life. Positioned himself and Mick Jagger as the only true creative forces. As Wyman once summed it up, "I didn't leave the band because I was tired of music. I left because I just couldn't take it anymore." That feeling was backed by a long list of grievances. Being excluded from decisions having his base, parts replaced without his knowledge, and being made to feel unnecessary. Even while standing on stage night after night for more than 30 years, Bill Wyman had never spoken these truths so plainly. Only in 2024, during an unpublicized talk, did he finally voice them openly. Keith Richards has offered no response. Mick Jagger and Ronnie would have also remained silent, perhaps because none of them are truly surprised. The rift between Bill and Keith dated back to the very beginning. As the oldest member of the Stones, Wyman joined when Keith was still young and already saw him as an outsider. Their differences never boiled over into open fights. Instead, they quietly simmered and deepened over the decades they spent on stage. Together, Bill Wyman was born on October 24, 1936, in Lewisham, London, into a poor working-class family. His childhood was shaped by wartime hardships, poverty, and cramped living conditions in Penge, southeast London. By the time Mick, Keith, and the others were teenagers in the late 1940s, Bill was already a grown man, having entered adulthood in the early 1950s. When he officially joined the Rolling Stones in December 1962, replacing Dick Taylor, he brought not just his own amplifier and quality equipment, but also the solid, reliable bass playing the group badly needed. Keith himself once admitted that in those early years, Bill had more real performance experience than the rest of them combined. But that early respect faded. The band's Cormac, Keith, Brian Jones, and Charlie Watts had already been tightly knit through earlier London music circles. Bill, older and from a very different background, was essential musically, but never fully embraced as part of their inner circle. Rehearsals, songwriting sessions, tour planning, even private hangouts, Bill was rarely central. In a 1962 journal entry, he wrote, "I feel more like a piece of equipment than a member." During the mid-1960s, Bill held the band's rhythm, steady through albums like Out of Our Heads, 1965, Aftermath, 1966, and Between the Buttons 1967, critics called him the most dependable member in a constantly evolving and sometimes clashing group. But after Brian Jones's Bill's closest friend in the band died in 1969, the internal divide grew sharper. At Brian's funeral, Bill refused to travel on the band's private jet, angering Keith, who saw it as a lack of loyalty. From then on, Keith began to dominate the stage, the studio, and the internal dynamics of the group. While Bill felt his role shrink, by the mid-1960s, Mick and Keith were firmly credited together as Jaggerratchards on all songwriting, leaving Bill and others as performers only, with little creative recognition. In Stone Alone, Bill claimed that he had contributed to the riff idea for Jumpin' Jack Flash alongside Brian Jones and Charlie Watts, yet his name was nowhere in the credits. Similarly, he was the one who voted in favor of releasing I Can't Get No Satisfaction despite initial hesitation from Mick and Keith. But again, no credit was given. Financially, the gap widened. In a 2024 Guitar Come interview, Bill revealed that by the mid-1980s, when the Stones paused touring, he had sunk into. Meanwhile, Mick and Keith enjoyed steady income from publishing royalties. I made about 1/10 of what they did, Bill stated, emphasizing that it wasn't from lack of effort. He had taken part in every show, every recording, and all promotional duties. But he had no influence on the band's decisions and was excluded from strategic meetings. As he once put it in a 1991 interview, "I wasn't excluded. I was never invited." By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Bill knew he no longer belonged. During recording sessions, he was often kept waiting all day, only to find the bass parts had already been recorded by Keith or a guest musician. On the Massive Steel Wheels Urban Jungle Tours 1989-1990, he performed every night, but had no say in production, set lists, or even sound arrangements. In 1989, when the Stones were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Keith didn't mention Bill in his speech, something that didn't go unnoticed by fans. In 1991, Bill told the band privately that he was leaving. Their reaction, he said later, was petty and ungracious. Keith would later write in Life 201 that Bill was replaceable and that his departure didn't make much difference. Mick was equally dismissive, once saying, "If we need someone on bass, I'll do it," which Bill called the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. After stepping down, Wyman formed Bill Wyman's Rhythm Kings in 1997, a blues, rock and jazz group free of commercial pressures. For the first time, he was making music entirely on his own terms. He also pursued solo albums, photography, archaeology, and writing. His book Rolling with the Stones to 002 became one of the most complete visual histories of the band. In 2012, Bill briefly rejoined the Stones for 2 songs at their 50th anniversary concert, but kept his distance afterward. In 2023, he played bass on Live by the Sword from Hackney. Diamond's his first recording with them since 1989, and the last 2 featured Charlie Watts. There was no grand reunion, it's just a quiet contribution. For over 30 years, Bill never publicly attacked Keith Richards, but he also never sought reconciliation. He summed it up in 5 words: "I gave enough," though often overlooked as one of the Stones' defining faces. His steady bass lines on classics like Paint It Black, Under My Thumb, and Miss You shaped the band's sound. In ways casual listeners might never realize, Bill Wyman walked away not to settle scores, but to preserve himself. More than 3 decades later, he still holds no regrets.